Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to continue my adventures in Upfront and hopefully give you a slightly more fruitful demonstration of the desert rules than I did my previous time. A warm welcome to all of you who've been following the Upfront series. It's very good to have you back and thanks for watching. For those of you who are just dipping your toe into the water, some explanation is necessary. Previously to this video, I had attempted to show the desert rules in action using a homemade scenario set in Kasserine Pass in 1943. I thought I'd set up for a decent ambush scenario by an outnumbered American squad against a German column of infantry supported by a Panzer IV. I was very wrong. The luck of the cards was against the US Army, but it was the quickest game of Upfront I've ever played, in that the Germans broke the American squad on turn one, and the upshot was that I ended up demonstrating very little of anything except just how unbalanced that scenario was. And I ended up just talking about the desert rules generally to try and salvage something from that video. So in an attempt to show the desert rules again alongside an example of infantry and armor cooperation in Upfront, I am back in Kasserine Pass, but I have changed the balance somewhat. So this scenario that I'm playing is set somewhat after the last German advances had been halted, and when the US forces who had regained their footing were now beginning to think about pushing the Germans back. So what we have here is the standard 10-man German squad, the first 10 personality cards from the German deck. And these men have been left, hypothetically, for this scenario, as a rear guard to try and slow pursuing American forces down. They are about to encounter a US patrol with some limited armored support. So we have a 10-man US squad, slightly weaker than normal. They usually have 12 men, but they are backed up by an M3 half-track, which brings quite a considerable amount of firepower to the battlefield. Now, the other lesson I learned from the previous scenario was, if you want a bloodbath, start your opposing factions at relative range 4. However, do not do this if one side significantly outguns the other, because I'm afraid the close range of that previous encounter was a major factor in the rapid destruction of the US blocking force. So I've decided, for the purposes of this scenario, I'm going to grant both sides plenty of room to maneuver. Everyone is starting at relative range 0. So hopefully you'll see more of a game of this. I am going to be playing with the full desert rules, so it's going to be pretty much every card in a terrain card representing something else, with the exception of the -3 strength buildings cards, which are just treated as coward cards. I'm also subjecting this scenario to the effects of the sandstorm rule, so it's very possible that the scenario will end sooner than I anticipate, but we'll see how that goes. So I've completed the initial setup. The Germans have gone for a fairly standard dispersal, which basically reduces the target profile of their men, gives each group a reasonable amount of firepower, and also, most importantly, in Upfront, it separates the men by their capability as soldiers, I'll say. So the men of average morale are the fire base with the LMG. A supporting group really are going to be provided by those 3 riflemen. They're the 3 men, Schultz, Beck, and Wallach. They've got the shakiest morale in the German squad. The maneuver element is really going to be built around the core of 2 very tough privates, Wolf and Bernhoff, and the squad leaders, Dietinger and Hessel. Now, putting the 2 together is a bit chancy, but it does put 2 heavy hitters together in the same group. So I think it makes sense for the Germans to do this. The US forces similarly have gone for a fairly standard dispersal, the recon element of the recon patrol, if I can call them that. are the unfortunate privates Smith and Burke. These men will probably spend most of their time hugging the ground, but they can put out some firepower. I've decided to just give the BAR, the Browning automatic rifle, a minimal escort. I think just enough to make it a decent fire base in its own right. Because to be perfectly honest, the US already have a fire base in the form of the half track. But what I have done is I've beefed up their maneuver group. It's the strongest single group in the game, sorry, in this scenario, I should say. And I have split up the squad leader and the assistant squad leader for the US. So Sergeant Burnett is there doing what he would normally do, directing the fire of the support element, while Corporal Moores is taking the lead with the maneuver group. Attacker has the initiative in this scenario, so I will look at the American hand for initial terrain placement. Now, brush in the desert rules effectively is unchanged. It's just treated as scrubland, I think. However, woods are treated as an oasis, so whether you play them on yourself or on someone else, you have to see whether they really exist or not, because they may be a mirage. Now, I'm a bit stuck with this because it's a decent bit of terrain if it does not disappear on you, and I'm wondering whether to give the Blues Brothers over there a bit of starting cover. I tell you what, it cannot hurt. I'm going to attempt it as initial placement, and I'm going to draw a card. If it's a black random number, it's a real oasis. If it's a red one, it's a mirage. And it's a mirage. Poor Smith and Burke. What they thought they saw, they did not see. So that failed attempt means the Germans can place terrain next. Now, looking at their hand, now they have a marsh which represents soft sand, and this can be quite devastating for vehicles. So they are actually going to start by putting the half track in serious trouble. So the US half track has started the scenario in soft sand, which is very unfortunate. It'll have to make a bog check when it tries to move out of there. Unlike a marsh in the European setting of upfront, units cannot reject soft sand. If you wade into it voluntarily or it's played on you, you have to put up with it. So that's not a brilliant start for the US forces. Back to them, they do have that brush card which offers some limited cover, and which they will just play on their weakest elements. The Germans have expended their only terrain card, so that is it. Both sides will refill their hands. And the scenario will commence. So the US forces, they've got some choices. That minefields and the pillbox are cower cards in this scenario. They really might as well get moving, so somewhat callously, but really to draw German fire if nothing else, as they're in cover, Smith and Burke are going to begin moving forward. Now, the victory conditions in this scenario are the same as any regular scenario in upfront, which is you either break the enemy squad or victory will go to the first side that occupies terrain which reduces the value of incoming enemy fire with at least 4 of their soldiers, or I realise that was a very clunky sentence. That tends to be how the scenario book puts it. Essentially get at least 4 of your guys into defensible terrain at relative range 4, do it before the other guy, or break his squad. Both sides break at 50% casualties or greater. So, can I do any shooting? There's some low-value firing cards in there that may be worth using. The US has the superiority in firepower, and they have 3 whole decks to exploit it. So let's see what we can do. At relative range 0, The BAR generates a firepower of 2. Well, that's just perfect. They're going to use that one. Now, the two most obvious choices at this range are to try and suppress the German LMG or to pick off the easy targets over there. The German LMG is certainly very dangerous, but as the US player, if I was going for a squad break, I would be tempted to hose those fellows down. Now, that is a little bit gamey because in real life there would be no way that I would know that they're the weaker squad, but the weaker half of the squad, I should say. But I still want to reduce the rifle element, if only because I want to clear a path for Smith and Burke. So Private Fox will fire his weapon at those men. The Germans have no concealment card, so it's going to be a straight shot. Let's see what happens. Private Schultz is fine. In the desert, weapons are somewhat more likely to foul up, malfunction. They're just more prone to it because of the soft sand. So while the BAR normally jams on a 6 in most parts of the world, in the desert it jams on a 5 or 6. So I'm afraid that weapon is just jammed. Bad luck, Private Fox. So I will give the unfortunate Private Fox a malfunction counter. See if the camera can focus on that. No, it's having a bit of trouble. Yes, it's a malfunction counter, and it will just remind me on future turns of what random number he needs to draw to successfully repair his gun. I'll see if that makes any difference. No, you're not going to do it. Oh, wait. There we go. So he needs a black 0 to 6. If he gets a red 5 to 6, his weapon is removed from play, so he really does not want that. So that ends that group's turn. This is where the firebase comes in. The half-track is somewhat in danger of bogging in soft sand, but so what? They've got a fire card they can play, and they are going to aim at the same target. So let's see what happens. Firepower of 3. Oh my goodness. That's a very different piece of luck. Private Schultz is dead. So the Americans have scored first blood in this battle. That was quite a shot. So I've placed a bolt action rifle counter there to denote that there's a dropped weapon. So should any of Schultz's squad mates in that group need to pick up a rifle, they could do. Let's carry on firing for the M3. Ooh, goodness. Private Beck is pinned. And as the heavy machine gun continues to chatter away, Private Wallach is also pinned. So that was a brilliant opener for the US forces. They have already suppressed one element of the German squad. The last group is unable to take any of these actions. It's really the US have only got a sniper and what amounts to 2 cower cards in their hand. So they will draw fresh cards. It's not bad. And await the reaction of the German player. So the Germans, now they face a difficult choice. That is a very powerful rally card, and usually it would be worth holding it for a more extreme situation. However, with the smaller size of their squad, the Germans have to be mindful of potential losses. They've already had 1 man out of their 10 killed, and those 2 are wavering and might well run away at any moment, especially if the pressure's kept up. So with some reluctance, but I would say it's a necessity, the Germans play their rally all card to encourage Privates Beck and Wallach to get back in the game. So they are rallied. Now, the Germans have a very useful card. Buildings with -2 defense rating count as escarpments in this game. If the Germans can get into that territory, that would be very useful for them. However, they can't budge at the moment, so they're going to content themselves with some shooting. The obvious target at this range are the two unfortunate US privates who are making their way cautiously forward. They're partly protected behind some brush and scrub, but they're also exposed because they're moving. It's worth a shot. At that distance, the Germans have 2 firepower available. These fellows can't do anything about that. But what they might do is attempt to entrench. Now, entrenching in the desert is very difficult. In any other terrain, it's either a black or a red 0 to entrench. In desert terrain, it's only a black 0, so your chances of doing it are halved. So they fail to dig in. The LMG develops 4 firepower at relative range 0, so it's quite tempting to return the favour to the US squad. That's not a very powerful card though, so the Germans, they're not too keen to burn cards either, because this is one of those scenarios where the onus is equally on the defender to occupy a good position as the attacker, so they'll be a bit cautious. They're going to expend that card, but they're only going to target Smith and Burke down there. So with that scary ripping sound, Hitler's saw erupts into fire, and first shot misses. So firepower of 1. The cover of the brush and the fact that they're moving cancel each other out. 2 for 3. Yes, Private Burke is pinned. So when he next takes cover with his buddy, he will not be able to advance further until he is rallied. Not too bad a turn for the Germans. They've managed to sort themselves out a bit. They're not going to discard any of their cards, even though they have the option of discarding 1. These will fill up their hand for a while, but when it comes to the crunch, it will be worth having them available. So the German player would hang on to those, I think. So he draws his 5 cards. That's not too bad. On we go. Not surprisingly, Smith and Burke on the US side are not enjoying their vulnerability from being on the move. So as this is a cower card for them, they are simply going to hit the dirt where they are. Hit the dirt or the sand in a scenario like this? I wonder. Sergeant Burnett's group has lost its main weapon, so the sensible thing, I think, for Private Fox to do will be to try and fix his gun. And he does not succeed. He's still tinkering with it. The half-track, in the meantime, is unable to fire or really do anything. The US have a very decent firing card, but they're going to have to get really close to use that. It is tempting to try and put the half-track in gear, but it does run the risk of bogging it down. I'm not too sure I want to risk it doing that just yet. So instead, what I would do is I think I would get Corporal Moores and his 4 men in motion, see if they can apply some pressure on the other end of the line for the Germans, so they begin to move forward. So a bit of a quiet turn for the US this turn. And ooh, that could come in handy. That too, maybe, in the future. Back to the Germans. So there's not a huge amount they can do at the moment. That smoke may be useful to them, but not so much right now. The Germans are thinking, given the US advantage in firepower, they're going to order all their groups to attempt to entrench. So moving across the table that way. Nope, sadly. This being the desert and all. No, sad again. And no. So again, it's a huge difference. In any other theatre of war, those two red zeros would have been successful entrenchment attempts, but here in the desert, they are not. So that was a very dull turn for the Germans, and they will just discard that card because it's the least useful right now. See what they get instead. Ooh, that's better. That is something they could use next turn. The US forces. Now, Private Burke is liable to run away any second if he's not brought to his senses, so that rally card will be spent to get him to change his priorities a little. Looking at what we have, Private Fox is really going to have to try and fix that BAR. He fails again. Somebody's going to be put on extra cleaning duties when the squad gets home. That still can't go anywhere and can't really do anything. But I'm not going to leave Corporal Moores and his men out in the open, so that scenario cower card is going to be played as such. So they've advanced a short hop and now they're hugging the ground. Looks like we're going to have a bit of quiet while both sides are trying to jockey for position, but things are looking good for the US. They've been getting a steady trickle of movement cards, which is perfect. It's what they want. The German options have not improved massively. Oh, rats. I bet they're wishing they'd had that a turn ago. It would have been an easier way of waking up Wallach. Never mind. That group is going to attempt to entrench, and they succeed. So now hitting them is just that little bit harder for the US unless they vacate that position. To be honest, at the moment, there's not a great reason for them to. They might as well sit there. The center group can't develop enough firepower to use these cards, and not even that one, so they're going to try to dig in as well. They don't succeed. The LMG has a fine mix of targets that it can go for, but it is most tempting. It's very tempting to hose down that group, but again, the Germans are mindful of burning too many cards at this stage from the decks. They don't really want to accelerate the time until they're a bit more sure of being able to press forward to a winning position. So they're going to carry on their cautious play. That's a strength 3 fire card, which is decently strong, so it is tempting to try and knock off that wing of the US force again. The US has no concealment cards, so the Germans open fire. Oh gosh, that was very close. That nearly took Private Smith's head off, and unsurprisingly he is pinned. And the same goes for Private Burke. That was an extremely good bit of shooting for the Germans. So once again, US Group A is facing problems. The Germans decide they will not discard any of these cards because they're all pretty useful. Well, although they might have a tough decision to make soon. For the US, okay, the pinning of Smith and Burke is a nuisance, that's for sure. But it's not fatal necessarily. I think priority really is with Group. We can't rally them, there's no rally cards. Group B's priority is to get their LMG fixed, and they're still not managing it. What to do? We have a rather weak firing card, and I'm tempted to give that job to the infantryman of Group D, while the half-track attempts to bring itself forward. So I will play this card, and I will have to do a bog check for it. So consulting the B for bog, that's a black random number, which means the vehicle is not bogged, thank goodness. If it had been a red, I would have been in trouble. So they are happily on the move, and they are out of the soft sand, or getting out of the soft sand, we hope. Meanwhile, Corporal Moores, at relative range 1, his group develops 4 firepower. Well, it's a pity about those larger cards, but never mind. A card that weak might as well just be dedicated to trying to knock off. Oh, Group D is a bit too far removed. They can only target an adjacent. All right. Group D is just going to hose down Group C over there and hope that they make an impression. The chances are not great, but it would be worth it if they at least silence the machine gun, if only by suppressing it. So firepower of 1. The Germans have no cower card and they're not entrenched. So starting with the LMG, no. Moving on to Schumacher, no. And finally, Private Streak, no. Quick burst of rifle fire, that is, didn't really achieve anything. Okay, not the best turn for the US, but not a terrible one either. Ooh, a flank card. That could be rather useful. Back to the Germans. Yes, their options are now severely limited. Really, the groups that aren't already entrenched are going to attempt to entrench because that's all they can do at the moment. So the centre group fails. The LMG group, oh, could have done that when they were shooting at someone. That would have been handy, but no, means they do not entrench either. The Germans are going to discard this card because it's the weaker terrain. Or are they? This is where it gets really tricky. I'm tempted to say, given that the range is closing rapidly as the US forces move forward, so maybe they want to hang on to those, they'll discard the low wall, which in desert terms represents a low rocky ridge, because they have the much stronger escarpment card. And draw that. That could be useful defensively. So back to the US. They have, somebody obviously likes them. They're going to play that Rally 3 card to get Smith and Burke back on their feet. They really, really want to get this group caught up with the others, but there's not that much point moving them forward until Fox sorts out his LMG, so he's going to try and do that. And he does it! At long last, his machine gun is back in action. Well done, Fox. Now the half-track at relative range 1 doesn't develop enough firepower to use any of the existing US firing cards. They're going to leave, they're just going to carry on getting out of the soft sand. This group generates 4 firepower at this range. But is it worth playing the flank card? Particularly against that group, because it would be worth getting rid of them. I'd say they're going to try it. So they are going to maneuver to try and flank the Germans. US draws new cards. Ooh, maybe their gamble will pay off. The Germans, for their part, are still rooted either by fear or indecision. yes, their options are not great at the moment. I'll carry on the entrenchment attempts because that's the most logical thing for them to try and do. Both attempts fail. They really do need to keep cycling cards through their hand to try and get something usable. With some reluctance, that card is going to go and be replaced by... Ooh, that was worth it. Excellent. Finally, some luck for the German side. Back to the US. Hard to say, really. We've got that group now capable of shooting again, but they're quite badly out of range. The half track could fire off one of these cards. In fact, I might do that. They're on the move still. These two units can try, well, these two groups can try and entrench. We'll start with A. Nope. And Group B. Nope. They're having as much trouble digging in as the Germans are, unsurprisingly. And while it's rumbling forward, the half-track is going to open fire and is going to try spraying the German machine gun group this time. So fire strength of 2. The Germans do have a concealment card this time, so it's reduced to 1. Starting with Schussel and the LMG, no effect. Private Schumacher, 2, not enough to pin him. Private Streak, they have achieved a pin on Private Streak. Okay. Doesn't really bother the machine gun, but it is a start. And the US will just draw a card to end their turn. Now for the Germans, okay. This is all rather annoying. I think they were hoping that that they would be able to do something by now. It's a bit... The first priority really is to rally Streak, but that takes away that group's ability to do anything else. So useful having a flank card. But at this relative range, that group develops a very weak firepower. No, the temptation instead, despite the fact that they're in a nice cushy area and this is potentially a waste of a flank card, the Germans are going to push Beck and Wallach forward, because if they're going to go for terrain occupation, they really need to get these fellows out forward before the US advances too far. And also they do need those admittedly more expendable men to try and be a nuisance. In a way, either draw fire from the US forces because they could pose a threat if they get close, or just distract them while the more valuable German groups do their thing. So they leave their entrenchments, much to their annoyance, and also they leave behind poor Private Schultz's rifle. They won't have any further attempts at getting that. If they can enter the escarpment, that would actually be a bit of a stronger position than any entrenchment they could dig. So they're not discarding either of those cards, and they are going to... Oh, apologies. I would have attempted to entrench with that group, and it would have failed. So I'll just draw the Germans a new hand. We'll see what happens. The US, in the meantime, is somewhat out of options now. In fact, if anything, we have a bit of a quandary, really. Do we get them out of that, the half track, out of that dodgy terrain before the Germans discard a nasty card on them? Or do we get Group D's infantrymen into a secure location from which they can exploit their flanking ability against the machine gun group. It's a tricky choice. I think, as the US player, I'd be very concerned about the German ability to discard cards on me. So I'm going to put the half track out of harm's way by getting it into flat open terrain that hopefully doesn't include soft sand. They'll just have to carry on. And I think I'll just try entrenchment attempts for those two. So them, no. Group B, no. Okay. No one's having a good day with their shovels. Good defensible terrain. It was worth waiting for that. It was very psychic of somebody. Right, well, this one is a bit of an easy one for the Germans. The two privates here are going to occupy that escarpment. Bit short of where they want to be for a terrain win, but it is a strong defensive position, and it just makes Beck and Wallach that little bit safer. This group still doesn't have enough firepower to do much, so they're just going to attempt an entrenchment for now. With the LMG, it's a different story. They have a nice fat target there in the shape of 4 US infantrymen trying to flank them, so not unnaturally they are going to open fire. The US has no cover cards, so they just have to hold their breath with this one. Corporal Moores. Nope, he's fine. Private McElroy. He's fine too. Private Fratali. Nope. So the Germans are only generating 1 firepower, so luckily for the US, these low random numbers are really helping them. Private Anderson. Nope. And Private Greenwood. Unfortunately for the US group, Private Greenwood must have got a little closer to the hot flying lead than everyone else did, so he is pinned. And the Germans will end their turn there. They may as well hang on to that card for now. It is a ridiculously powerful card, but you never know, and it's better than letting the US player have it if it disappears back into the deck. Of course, if they get stuck with a hand of cards they can't use in the near future, they could always ditch it. The option's always there. So, what are the US forces going to do? Options are not brilliant at the moment, but they can perhaps better do this before we rally Private Greenwood. These men will die gratefully behind the cover afforded by that low bit of rock. And more importantly, they can place their flank token. And they are going to be flanking. I'll angle it that way because of how they're positioned, but they are flanking Group C. So they've done a good job of achieving a flank fire position there at relative range 1, which means if they were all awake, they generate a firepower of 8, fairly respectable at this distance. The other two groups for now are just going to make entrenchment attempts. So, nope. Group B. Oh, they succeed. Right, well done. Oh, hang on a tick. Yes. -3 buildings count as cower cards again in the desert. And when they're drawn as a random number or random position check, they are removed from play. So I'll put that card out of the game. Means this group, until a movement card comes along, is slightly safer than the others. And unable to discard, the US will just draw. Two snipers. Maybe we ought to have a sniper heavy turn. So the Germans are stuck now. They've been flanked, their LMG's been flanked, and they're still not really in a position to do anything useful. Now, thankfully, they still can attempt entrenchments. You can't entrench on an escarpment, but you can try it as ever in normal conditions. So nope, Group B has failed. Group C has failed as well. And out of all the cards they have, I think there's no doubt that this is the least useful card, so they're going to get rid of that. And they get, ooh, all right. Oh, an oasis. Okay, well, maybe an oasis if it's not a mirage. US is sorely tempted just to do a double discard and use both those sniper cards, but they don't really want to risk weakening that that group over there just when they've achieved such a good flanking position. So just in case the Germans are entertaining notions of firing, they are going to rally Private Greenwood. And it may be worth just having Group A attempt to entrench, which they do not do. One card to top their hand back up. Oh, more mirages. I mean oases. We shall see. Oh, that's no good, really. The poor Germans, they've not had very good options so far. Again, entrenchment attempts because they're really going to need them. Oh, yes, the main German group has entrenched. The machine gun group has not. And as for terrain, it's tricky. I'm going to reluctantly discard that rally card simply because I've got a slightly better one. That's sometimes a false economy in this game. Ooh, another escarpment. Actually, this is starting to look a bit good for the Germans. They've got some eye on good terrain, but they really need movement cards. That's what's missing at the moment. Over to the US, it does appear it's definitely time to have that discard turn. So they are going to discard both sniper cards. This could be very, very mean indeed. One is going to be played on Group B, the other is going to be played on Group C. So, drawing for the results of the first sniper attack. Oh wait, you do the random position check first with snipers. So there's 4 men in that group. So the sniper is aiming at Private Wolf, who's the 4th man. And does he get him? No, he does not. That was actually a terrible shot. In fact, it's so terrible, Private Wolf has probably seen him. Let's see how the other sniper gets on. Random position check shows he is aiming at Private Streak. And he has pinned him. Good shot. And the US player draws 2 cards. Ooh, it's more escarpments and a movement card. Things are looking rather good. Right, the Germans are in an awful position now. They're not going to bother trying to wake up Streak because that would mean wasting a Rally 5 card. However, the US player has given them 2 opportunities to help dispose of their sniper. So the German Group B is going to react. To target a sniper who's just fired at you, you draw a card, and if your black random number, if that's what it is is higher than the sniper's number, then you've got him, counterfire. Thankfully, it was red. Had that been a black, just about anything would have beaten the sniper's original draw. But they're not out the woods yet, because the other angry German group is going to try and flush him out now. And they fail. The US sniper, having been a rather busy man a second ago, lives to carry on. Oh dear. Well, as there's a good chance that's going to be a mirage, the Germans are going to discard the woods card. Or the oasis, as I should properly call it. Movement, finally. Back to the US. I'm going to get Group A to try entrenching again. They fail. And now that Private Fox of Group B has fixed his machine gun and they've got a movement card, it's really time we got that group underway to join their fellows. I'm going for a broad, cautious advance with the US forces. I know you could risk a quick win by hustling one of your groups forwards, but I'm going to take this one slowly and carefully. We don't want any more Kasserine Pass style surprises. No one else can really do anything, although I could get them to try entrenching. Just to... Ooh, okay, that is a real pity. Near miss there. Never mind. Everything else is going fairly well. And another sniper. Promising. Right, the Germans still have the problem of whether to waste a Rally 5 card on Streak, and again, it's really not worth it. Of course, the trouble is, Streak being pinned is problematic, because as long as he's pinned, they can't move, and if they don't move, they are under flanking fire, potentially from Group D. It's a tricky choice. However, perhaps to force the US players' hand, and also really to bring them into action, because they've been quiet all game, the Germans are going to advance their main group. And it's not that bad an idea, because they do have that escarpment card. They're not going to discard any of these. They'll just draw. Ooh, maybe something they could use. No question about it. Well, first of all, the US player will attempt an entrenchment with Group A. No such luck. However, Group B is most definitely going to occupy a handy escarpment that they've spotted. The half track is still waiting on developments. As is this group, they might as well just try and entrench. No joy. So the US will just draw one more card. The Germans... Well, if the US can occupy escarpments, then so can Germany. They are going to smoothly take and seize those heights. Very professional. And their machine gun is going to try hitting back at the group that's flanking them. So they've got firepower 5. Got enough firepower to activate the card for a firepower 2. They are oblique to that group, C to D, which means the US soldiers only get -1 defensive bonus. So the firepower is currently standing at 1. They have no concealed cards, so they're just going to have to take this one. So Corporal Moores... Nope, he's fine. Private McElroy. And the German machine gun has jammed. That's not gone too well for them. Unfortunately, the fact that he has an assistant, the machine gunner, doesn't materially help his unjamming effort. So, while in theory both of them would be trying to clear whatever's wrong with the thing, there's no benefit in terms of the random number check. So all the Germans can do is sigh deeply and draw some more cards. I'm going to pause this here because I realise I've run on for quite a bit. But you can see the two sides are gradually pushing towards each other. The US forces somewhat more enthusiastically than their German counterparts, and who can blame them? They've got the heavy firepower on their side. The Germans have suffered from very limited options so far, but despite that, they've done creditably. They have lost a man, but that really was down to terrible bad luck at the beginning of this scenario. They've managed to get most of their men into defensive positions, but their only heavy support, that light machine gun, is in dire difficulty. Group C has a jammed weapon, their primary weapon, in fact, their squad's primary weapon, and they're immobilized by the fact that Private Streak is still pinned. So we'll have to see whether they can extricate themselves from that little problem, because if they can't adjust themselves into an advantageous position or beat the Americans to the punch of getting into defensive terrain, I predict that what's going to happen is that this squad, with its armored half-track backup, will just slowly close in on them and then get to the point where their superior firepower will either break the German squad or pin them. Either way, it then gives the US the luxury of deciding whether they want to go for the terrain win or just crush their opponents by inflicting enough casualties on them. But we will see how that pans out in the next video. I hope that this one has been interesting, and for those of you who are pondering getting into Upfront or thinking you might like to get your own sets out and have a go, I really recommend the Desert Rules. They are quite challenging to remember, but the more you get used to them and the more you play, the easier it gets. And there are no other terrain rules that get more complex than the Desert Rules, I will say that. So do give them a try. They can be awesomely good fun. You can use them in the desert, but in the North African scenarios, but they are equally applicable if you want to apply them to the harsher areas of Manchuria. If you want to have a spat between the Soviets and the Japanese, there's that option too. So I will see you all again when we continue this scenario. In the meantime, thank you very much indeed for tuning in. Look forward to seeing you in the next one.